Howdy Penguins, happy Friday. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the last video, the last vlog. Here I am in Kasugai Gardens, which is the Japanese gardens in Kelowna. That's because we're the sister city of a Japanese city. So I thought it'd be nice to do a little bit of a walk around in Kasugai Gardens so you can get some nice plants and Japanese fences behind you. How cool is that? Anyways, I thought this was an appropriate place to talk about Card-Jitsu. So, probably one of my favorite projects to work on, and it was right before things got a little crazy. So, it was the summer of 2008, and we had actually just hired our Brazilian team, and we were going to be doing our first language, and Penguins had asked us for Portuguese, and so that was the first language we picked to translate the website into. So we had our Brazilian team visiting us here in the summer in the Okanagan, and we knew that we were going to finally do ninjas. And ninjas were something that we'd been planning to do since 2005. And the reason why it took us so long to finally go ahead and do it is basically because we decided pets were probably more gender neutral. Boys and girls could adopt a pet, so we picked puffles first. And that's the main reason why ninjas went on the back burner. Probably the next chance we would have had to work on it, the team decided to work on spies. So they had these really cool ideas for missions, and so they did the missions instead. So it wasn't until 2008 that we finally got around. We were like, okay, it's time. We're finally going to do this. And we were going to be doing the trading cards with Tops. So what we needed to do first was really go, okay, well, what's the backstory to this thing? What are we going to do as an interesting backstory to make it worth this long wait? Penguin Chat 3 was actually the first item. So if you look back in the history of all the items that we ever released, that was actually the first one that was in there. Lance added that before he added anything else. It was colors and the ninja, which was hidden. And then it ended up in the homepage as well. So the homepage had this clickable penguin. You could click him, and then you would get the secret ninja penguin. And they had left that up. And the great thing is, like, for years, people just never stopped asking about when ninjas would come. So for me, this was a dream project because all of my influences are pretty much Japanese storytelling. So at the time, years ago, I was really into Final Fantasy IV, was released here as Final Fantasy II, Final Fantasy VI, which was released here as 3. But probably my top 2 influences that ended up sort of as influences for Card-Jitsu, at least from my perspective and what I was working on with it, was 2 things. Number 1 is Samurai Pizza Cats, just because it was so silly. It's this Japanese cartoon that when they released it here, they didn't have the script. So they basically, instead of translating word for word and doing an exact translation of the Japanese to English script, they just made it up. And it shows. The thing is really silly. So that one, just because it's quite ridiculous. And then the other one, just from a musical perspective, and sorry, you probably got a lot of sun there. It's sunny out here. So from a musical perspective, Legend of the Mystical Ninja, which if you haven't played it, I do really recommend it. It's probably one of my all-time favorite games, and it's set in I think a feudal Japan, but it's quite cartoony and silly. Anyway, so we knew that we had to do this story, but we also had come off the heels of the Save the Migrator story, which was earlier in 2008. And that one, it just probably felt a little drawn out. It just went on for a little too long. So we probably planned it a little bit too much in advance. So we know we didn't want to go for that long, but we needed to come up with a sort of a, how would we introduce ninjas to the dojo that hadn't had ninjas for years and all the rest of it. So how would we do this? So the decision was that, what if lightning struck the dojo and then it ended up having a big hole in it? It worked out really well because the Halloween party was, we wanted it to be all dark and stormy, and we thought, hey, if the weather sort of struck the dojo, maybe that gives a really good reason for basically what's outside the dojo. And so that's where you first saw Sensei, which to me is my favorite because, he just appears as this little character who's digging with a shovel, and he's the first gray penguin you ever saw, and he doesn't say anything. He's just got this question mark on him, so you're like, what the heck is this? What's going on? Who are you? And I remember there was quite a debate because some of the team were like, I really wanted question marks. I wanted them to have a clickable, I didn't want to just have a little character digging. I wanted it so you could click on him and open up the player card and then have the very sort of, Japanese role-playing game thing to do, have question marks, like you don't know who his name is. And I'd wanted to have one question mark, but I think it was Chris who ended up illustrating him and putting him in the game, Screenhawk, and he obviously added him with the famous 6 question marks spelling out the name Sensei. So the rest is sort of history after that. The thing we had to figure out what the story was, if there's ninjas in this world. Well, ninjas in the real world were trained assassins, so it's quite violent. So the question I had was, okay, well, how do we make them non-violent and still be in any way interesting? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they get away with it because they have, they've got their swords, they can swing things around. But we had decided we wouldn't have swords at that time because we thought it's probably a little too violent. So we had to try and figure out what's a kind of a good way to make them in any way reasonably interesting. So we thought the idea was, why don't we make them a little bit like what's behind me? I was trying to get to this. Yes, this is a Zen garden, albeit a very, very small one, for our sister city, Kasugai. In Japan, they have really large ones, and there's a whole story around these that I don't really know too well, so I won't try and explain. But we decided that they would be patrons of the arts, so we decided they'd be poetic. And we thought, wouldn't it be funny if the sensei just spoke in haiku? So I remember booting up a Pages document on my MacBook, and I just started going for it, and I started writing out, who is this character, where has he been, what's his origin story? And I think over the years the team will have changed it quite a bit, but the original intention was in that document. That project happened during one of the most chaotic times in Penguin history. We had just hired the Portuguese team, we'd hired a brand new manager of QA, we'd hired a brand new director of production, we had just moved offices, and when I was working on that Pages document, trying to outline the origins of Sensei and his story, we were just in the hallway. So basically it was, you would walk around, everybody had their offices, so you had all the programmers and the leads, creative leads, and the artists, they all had their own little offices. And then we were just sort of we're not sure what to do with this group, so we'll just put them in the middle. So we're in the hallway. So everybody would just be walking behind us all the time. It was not a great layout. So years later, we ended up putting up glass around it and sort of made it started lovingly referred to it as the fishbowl, because you could basically stare in at the humans that were in the fishbowl working. But yeah, if you ever get a chance to play something like Legend of the Mystical Ninja, Gambare Goemon, I think you pronounce it in Japanese, please do, because it's basically, that was my biggest inspiration for working on Card-Jitsu. And yeah, my favorite memory was just coming up with this idea, this name, or having Sensei writing in haiku and trying to figure out a way to have it written in haiku. And I loved that we did in the intro, we wanted to make it a little bit like the missions. So instead of just walking into a game, you're walking in to talk to a character. What we liked in the missions was you would go and you would talk to characters and you would get some dialogue choices. So we liked the idea of having some dialogue trees off of when you meet Sensei. So instead of just going in and just going to a menu and saying, oh, it's Card-Jitsu, play the game, we liked the idea that it was hosted by the Sensei. And I think that helped sort of make him, it helped elevate him as a mascot a little bit. And he was just fun. If you've ever seen Empire Strikes Back and see how Yoda interacts in that thing and how ridiculous Yoda is, they sort of scaled it back a little bit in the other ones, or at least in Return of the Jedi, but in the first one, I don't know if you've seen it, but either in Empire Strikes Back, you've seen how silly he is when you first meet him. It's such a great twist, because then when he finally does come around to being like, oh, you're this wise character, there's like a little nice plot twist, because when Luke first meets Yoda, he's just this ridiculous little monster who's just being, you know, silly, and he turns out to be this wise Jedi Master. And I think it was that sort of twist that I really liked for Sensei. I liked the idea that he was quite ridiculous, and that was something Lance and I quite liked, is the idea the power cards are just really stupid things are the most powerful. So the idea that the Mighty Plunger is the most powerful power card. Like, I like the idea that the power cards were something that was just sort of, you know, everyday objects that happen to be really, really powerful. That was cool. And yeah, the thing that was a really interesting challenge for us was because it was also at a time where we didn't have that much artwork just sort of sitting around that we're like, oh, we've got all this original art, because we were a small team. And we had to produce these cards, and it was like, okay, well, how are we going to use what we already have? So basically, I went through every single Flash file from the artists, and people were sending me their sketches and everything, and then we were just finding whatever we could to sort of put into this print run. And then I had to balance the spreadsheet. Still my favorite memory is, it still kind of stings a little bit, but I remember like sharing my spreadsheet where I created the first set of Card-Jitsu cards, and I decided, here's all the items, here's what suits they are like, are they fire, water, or snow? Here's what math they are, 2, 3, up to 12. I think it was 2 to 12. So they each had their power on them, right? Let's try and find one as an example. Yeah, like up in the top, you know, you have, this is a power card, and so it's a 10. So your power cards were 10s to 13s or whatever. And then your regular ones were like 5s, lower powered. So I made my spreadsheet, and he's like, he'd gone through the spreadsheet and gone through the math, and he's like, it's broken, but it works. I was like, oh, okay. And I kind of felt like my joke afterwards is like, that's sort of like me. Yeah, that works. But yeah, that was a fun time, because we had to come up with some sort of twist on why the heck we had picked the random selection of artwork that we had on these cards. Like, if I was working at Topps or WizKids and they're like, okay, it's this online game, and then they've got cards about plungers and fish and buoys in the ocean and the beach, and what? This is really confusing. What on earth is this? And then when it starts approaching Pokemon levels of success in terms of the trading cards in the market, it must have just been so surprising. At least if I were on the top side, I would have been so surprised. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know that I'm a bit mellow and chill, but yeah, that's a little bit of my memories, and I'd love to hear your favorite Card-Jitsu memories because it's more interesting than mine probably. So, waddle on.